Okay, so this is the printout you can pull here if you want to follow along. But we're going to talk about milk sample collection and how do you handle those so you can a, take a good sample, preserve that sample, and then get it tested in some way, shape, or form. Milk sampling and collection, and we probably should add processing in there. So, what do we need to do here? So, this is from the National Mastitis Council Handbook. So, we need to collect our supplies. We're going to use aseptic technique as best we can. We're trying to not contaminate the milk. We want to have only the bacteria that are in the udder in the sample. We don't want to add anything from our body, from the air, from the bedding, anything along the way. So, as it says here, contaminated samples lead to misdiagnosis, increased work, and improper management decisions. So you're going to need sterile or at least reasonably clean sample vials. You're going to need some sort of marker that's going to mark those vials. You've got your sterilization in some way, shape, or form. Usually we have the little packs, little towelettes that we use, but you can do the same thing with cotton balls and 70% alcohol. Probably everybody knows that by now. Paper towels to help clean up the udder beforehand. Containers to hold sample vials. And then if we're holding the samples for any length of time, an ice chest, refrigerator, or a freezer. Keep the samples cold until we can get them to the lab or till we can run those samples on farm. So here's our steps as we go through. Start up here, sample vials labeled. Sometimes people like to label things in advance. I tend to lean toward sampling them after, but you need either way, you need the date, you need the cow ID, and then whether you've sampled a quarter and identify which quarter you've sampled, or you're dealing with a composite. You're taking milk from all four quarters, and that becomes a composite sample, so CS compositive sample. So make sure the udders are clean. We need to wash and clean if we're going to do that. We get rid of the first few streams of milk. It's a pretty good idea to sample right after milking. That milk at the end is probably a good representative sample. So it suggests here that if you're doing this away from milking, we're going to pre-dip all the quarters, allow the proper contact time so we don't get surface or skin microbes influencing the sample. And then we wipe and clean the teat ends and make sure that everything's where it's supposed to be. So get all the dirt off, get all the debris off. We're going to scrub the teat ends with an alcohol solution that's going to disinfect. Alcohol, 75% alcohol, is a very rapid sanitizer. So that's one of the positives there. You keep going till you've got all the dirt off, all the debris, until they come back clean after you scrub the teat end. So if necessary, go back and do it again. We start with the far teats and then we work toward ourselves so we don't contaminate the teat ends with our sleeves. We take 3 or 4 streams of milk. We don't need a lot to get this done. We usually flip up the cap and that acts as a protector. And then we squirt that milk in on an angle so we don't get debris falling into the container. Make sure you don't touch the milk. Don't fill up the vial all the way. Again, you need very little to get this done. And make sure you post dip. And then when we immediately want to get these samples on ice or in the refrigerator or something that's going to cool them and stop them from growing and multiplying in the milk. That also helps with contamination. You've got the bacteria that's already grown in the milk, and if you have some sort of contamination, that doesn't have time to grow and multiply as it could. Um, if you're mailing samples, you probably want to freeze them in advance. You got somebody picking them up, sometimes you freeze them anyway. Frozen samples tend to break the spores apart on certain bacteria, and you get a better culture if you can do that. So if you're mailing out, think about when they're going to get there. You want them to get there as fast as possible. You don't want things sitting over the weekend or holidays or anything like that. When you're dealing with the milk vials that you got, maybe they're not perfectly sterile, but don't open them until you're ready to take the milk sample. You want to keep the bacteria out. If you're like me or a fidgeter, you're going to pop the top, close the top, pop the top, close the top, pop the top. That's going to contaminate the vial and you're going to get false positives for various bacteria. So let's keep the milk vials closed. Again, they talked about the scrubbing order. You're going to start away from you, work back towards you, and then as you sample them, or in this says treating, but we're going to sample the ones closest to us, and then work away from us so we don't get our sleeves, our hands, or anything, our arms contaminating those T ends and leading to false positives in the sample we collect.